Behold, the glorious Grendel Warframe, the best frame for all of the things, except for the things they are not the best at. Tanky in a very simple way, Grendel just has a ton of health, and there are a few frames like that. What Grendel offers is something to do while standing in the middle of a sea of enemies. One of the wonderful things about having a huge health pool specifically as your way to survive, among many other ways to survive, is that it means that you can use Rage and Hunter Adrenaline and get a lot of energy, but a lot of the other frames that do that, like Inaros and Nidus is a good example, don't need the energy. Either their abilities basically just don't cost energy, or in Aros' case, he doesn't really have that many abilities to cast, and they certainly don't cost very much. Whereas Grendel does. He has valuable things that he can do with that energy while he has it. So he's basically unkillable. Most frames can be unkillable, but Grendel is unkillable in a very passive way, a very free way. You don't really need to do anything to become unkillable. And while doing that, he has a way to get value out of that bulk, which is surprisingly basically a unique quality. He has an extremely powerful way to get value out of that energy. He can just straight up eat enemies and delete them from existence. You just nom and scroll your giant maw all over the screen, and those enemies are basically gone. Feast is uniquely suited for mobile missions like exterminates and stuff. You can eat a crowd of enemies and then move on and use them to help you kill the next group, which is efficient. Not a very common thing to have utility for, things like exterminates. Usually the only way a frame can be good at something like an exterminate or a capture mission is just by being fast. Grendel is good at them in a slightly different way, which is also pretty unique. That is a lot of the missions in Warframe. You just want to efficiently clear enemies and then move on. Grendel is quite good at that. There are then a few options to do things with those eaten enemies. You can either use them for buffs with Nourish, or you can use them as projectiles with Regurgitate, or actually you can do both. Nourish is complicated. This is probably the most complicated explanation of any ability that I'm going to talk about in this series. It's also not well understood. It has some very odd effects that are pretty unique, but that's fantastic. These buff your allies as well, so giving them a unique effect they can't get anywhere else is wonderful. So there are a few interesting options. There are three. One of them is pretty straightforward. It's damage buffing. It buffs Toxin. Elemental buffing is great. It does combine with your modded elements, like that cycle of elemental buffing frame ability augments. It's just like that. So usually it will give people more of exactly what they want, corrosive, viral, or gas. It'll give them Toxin, and that'll combine with whatever they're already using Toxin for. Wonderful. If they don't have Toxin, standalone Toxin also basically trivializes any shielded enemy because it goes by the shields. This is a big damage buff for your whole squad. Good stuff. Not particularly unique though. Then there's Nourished Armor. This one is weird. Basically, you trigger toxin damage explosions when enemies attack you. The explosions are centered on the attacking enemy and have moddable range and damage. The base values are low, but at low levels this will just automatically kill anything that attacks you, which is certainly not bad. And at higher levels, the toxin explosions have a moderate chance to stagger enemies, which is great. Little interruptions like that are excellent against enemies like heavy gunners, which can do the sustained damage to potentially kill even someone as tanky as Grendel, if they're uninterrupted, and Nourish Armor interrupts them, so they have to spool up again. That's solid for 1/3 of an ability. It sounds like Nourished Armor gives you defensive stats, which Grendel would not really benefit from even if it did give him that, so it's nice that it gives this extremely bizarre but actually fairly nice ability. And then there's Nourished Energy. Now Grendel does have a lot to use his energy for. Getting more of it from all sources, which is what this does, is fantastic. This is basically the only ability of its kind. It's just an energy gain multiplier. No matter how you get energy, you just get a lot more of it. Notably, it works with Rage and Hunter Adrenaline. This is great because keeping many enemies in Grendel's stomach is very costly, and it disables energy regen like Zeneric and energy plates. So if you want to just delete a bunch of enemies from existence and hold them in your stomach long enough for them to die, you're going to need a lot of energy, and this is how you're going to get that energy. Right, lots of options for eating enemies. Eating them also does a lot of damage to them, and Grendel's stomach decays their armor, so you can kill enemies by just munching on them a lot like that. Regurgitate, on the other hand, is much simpler, so you can also use them as projectiles. Regurgitate spits an enemy out as a projectile, does scaling damage to enemies. A scaling damage ability is great. Regurgitate doesn't even cost energy. Overall, just excellent. If a frame is going to have an ability that's a weapon, it's going to be good, and damage that scales with enemy level is pretty good. Meatball. Pulverize is not efficient, but it can be a lot of fun. Grendel really gets the business out of the way with his buffs and almighty ability to eat enemies and delete them from existence, so having an ability that changes how movement works is in a way a very good fit for Grendel. He doesn't really need another powerful ability here, he arguably wouldn't even use it. So whatever, this is a very strange and unique ability, and at low levels it can kill enemies. It can be a fun way to use Grendel. You can stay in Pulverize in Meatball for as long as you want, as long as you have energy. Once you get into it, you do need an enemy in your stomach to get in, but even if you digest that enemy and kill them in your stomach while in Pulverize, you can stay in it. So this is particularly good for open worlds. The best minigame in Warframe is Grendel Meatball Race to the Gates of Cetus in Plains of Eidolon, and if having a good minigame on top of a powerful kit and tankiness doesn't make you a good frame, I don't know what does. Now I know what you're thinking. Grendel must be my favorite Warframe. Isn't that right?